Today's time together is, as with everything at this time of the year, it's the odds and ends collection, because I fielded a number of questions from folks around, hey, what about this? What about this? And thank you for sharing those with us, because that gives us a little bit of a direction. So we're going to talk about some of those odds and ends today. But as always, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, unmute and ask as we look at what is shaking. So the first one was looking at the word women. Where did the WO come from? Like what's going on there? So fun to dig into this one. So the woman is an adult female human. Late Old English was women. And look at, even in late Old English, we see that plural shifting from the A to the E. Remember, we talked about plurals. Was that last time before? About how we have some of those, irregular, I hate using that word, plurals that are just doing things that aren't the ES plurals or the S plurals. And so we see this all the way back into Old English. It literally means woman, man. I love it. So originally we had, now I don't know if their eyes were short or long in Old English. I don't speak Old English, and just in case anyone's concerned about that. But with would have been the word, and then it became a compound word of wife man. So we have this, apparently women can't function without being associated with marriage, because that's a thing back then. Maybe even today in some places. So we have wife, man as a compound word, but man here doesn't mean man. It means human being, because of course, man is the default definition for human being. So we literally have a woman human being is kind of what the word means historically. But literally meaning woman, man. And it could have meant woman. It also could have meant female servant. And I find it very interesting that we have that differentiation there, that you could be a female servant and maybe not be a woman. I don't even know. The patriarchy has a long history, my friends. So it's coming around here. But in Old English, the word man was referred to both sexes. It just meant human being. So, and we see this a lot, right? When we're looking at old literature and they're talking about man, they're not actually talking about man. They're talking about people, but that's not the word they were using. So where did the WO come from? Well, it came from what we see as wife, meaning woman, and we added it to human being. So woman, human being, or woman, man, which I think is just funny. And I think knowing that silly story might be the thing that could help kiddos like giggle a little bit when they write the word down. I don't know. I will forever giggle about the word. And we talked about this also historic or like previously, but when we have different words, there's a time and a place to dig into the etymology of the word. And for some kiddos, the story is the hinge point that they are going to remember the story and therefore remember that the spelling of that word. There's other times where the etymology doesn't land us where we need it to land us. And so we look at other pieces. So it just so happens that for a couple of these, we are very much looking at the etymology. So the second question, I framed it this way: Colonel versus Colonel, WTF? Because to be fair, like what is actually going on there? And again, interestingly enough, so of course, we all hear an R sound when we say the word colonel, even though there's an L in the middle of the word. What is going on there? Well, look at its original spelling. It had an R in it historically. So colonel, the R, was part of the original spelling back in the 1540s. From French, again, we're seeing there's the R right there. Modified by dissimilation from Italian, which is where the L is showing up. Oops, my very, yeah, okay, I did draw boxes. So we have the R there, and then we see the L coming out of Italian. I didn't know this, that it's connected to Latin for pillar. And so if you think about a column, and how troops march in rows, this is only based on what I watch on television. I have no context for this whatsoever. But when I see it in the movies, they march in rows, and they're marching in pillars. And so the chief commander of those troops is a colonel, and the L from the pillar, Latin, is showing up here in the spelling that we have today. So the French spelling was reformed in the late 16th century, and the English spelling was modified in the 1580s in learned writing to conform to the Italian form via translations of Italian military manuals. But the pronunciations of both the R and the L, so at some point it might have also been pronounced colonel? I don't even know where the emphasis, I don't know where the emphasis would be there, friends. But you could pronounce it with an L or you could pronounce it with an R in the middle up until the 1650s. And then again, why this is the case, the R pronunciation prevailed because of its original spelling in the 1540s, but the L stayed because of the translations coming out of the Italian military manuals. So like that is a bizarre history. Does that really help explain anything? No, not a lot. But what I loved about it is underneath, it shows that colonel with an R is an obsolete spelling of colonel as we know it with the L, to show kiddos that this is how it was once spelled. So, you know, this is just one of those strange things that happens in English spelling. There's no other way to like craft that nicely. Maybe Mary Beth would have like a nicer story, but I just think that's odd in the most memorable sense.
But Charlie, I think that's what kids will remember too. You had a conversation with it, right? So you come up with this word. Why is it spelt the way it is? Why does it, look the way it does or whatever? When you bring attention to a word and you do a deeper dive like this, for some kids, that will be what helps them remember. So when they go to spell that word, they'll do it correctly.
Truth, right?
Because you brought some attention to it for whatever reason. So
for whatever reason
or whatever, right? Like,
yeah. Let's talk about how odd this is.
Yeah, totally.
But I had no idea that historically it was once spelled with an R, which allows me to go, okay, so maybe it's not so nutty that we pronounce it with an R, even though it's spelled with an L. And remember, spelling is one of those evolving things. And so who's to say that 100 years in the future, if we still use this word, the spelling hasn't shifted or changed? That could happen.
Or it goes back to the R.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, no, I just think bringing attention to it is what for some kids they need. But if you never talk about it and you never highlight these pieces, you're really not increasing the chance that the likelihood that kids are going to spell that word correctly is going to improve, right? So you just got to talk about it.
Well, and even just a conversation, like how does the word kernel, just looking at it, not knowing that that's how we say it, and the word columns, like what do you notice about that? Their connections. Oh, what does a kernel do? Like you could have that conversation and say, okay, so that's why the spelling is the way it is. Yeah. But now let's talk about the pronunciation, which is like a whole other level of WTF. Like I don't even know how else you would describe that. Now, this one I thought was really interesting. So then we have kernel, spelled in a way that you would think it would be spelled, kind of. And so we see that it's edible substance in a nut or the stone of a fruit, but look at the Old English spelling. Not that different from the current spelling in the sense of attaching phonemes to graphemes sort of a way. But it comes from the root of corn. So this kern part comes from corn plus EL as a diminutive suffix. And a diminutive suffix is the one that you put on a base to make it like the smaller version. So a kernel is the smaller version of like it's tinier than the seed, if you were thinking about it that way. The most common diminutive form would be ET, I would say. So like the word jacket actually was meant to refer to women's coats when it was first introduced. So men wore a jack. It was something to do with coats of arms. I don't know the whole story. And women wore a jacket because it was the smaller version. You have a pig and you have a piglet. So the et is the diminutive suffix there. So we have el acting as a diminutive suffix with the root of corn. And this idea that it's the core or the center part of thing, right? A kernel of truth is from the 1550s. So this really brings up the question around these two words brings up the homophonic principle, which is whenever possible, two words that are pronounced the same but are unrelated will have different spellings. And this reinforces the whole thing that we know about English spelling in that it's all about meaning in written text. So if I'm listening to you and you're talking about the kernel and the kernel, I might not know what's going on, but if I read this on a piece of paper, I would absolutely know what's going on because these two words are clearly spelt very differently. And that's on purpose. That's a feature of English spelling. That's not there just to drive everybody batty. Okay. So those are the first two questions. This is let me help you, friends. So not everything that we find on the interwebs that we purchase, even if it says it is morphologically accurate, is in fact morphologically accurate. So this little number, I think, is meant to be like interactive notebook thing. Like you glue it down and then under each of the flaps, you write the definition of the word. So I want to talk a little bit about accessing commercially available resources and then maybe taking a step back and asking ourselves a couple of things when we look at these things. So the first thing I noticed when I saw this was, okay, if ASTR is the base, then how did I get from the base to asteroid? That's not a thing. What would I add to ASTR to now spell out the word asteroid? Houston, we have a problem because we don't see a direct correlation there. So that led me to wonder, is there more than one base element at play here? Because we know when we add affixes to a base, we don't just start shuffling around letters and throwing things here willy-nilly. Like there's a pattern involved. There's a system involved. So there's no way for us to go from STR to STEROID. There's no way we could build that out. So in order to do this, we have to look at word sums. So when I look at the words, and these are the words that are all down the page, I started pulling them apart into word sums. And just a reminder about how we hypothesize and work with word sums, the first thing we asked ourselves is, how do we think the word is built? Now, if I was going to wave a magic wand and rebuild this resource, maybe I wouldn't have ASTR in the middle. Maybe what I'd have is just all the stuff around the outside that I know is connected in some way to this meaning or sense of star. And I'd ask the students to look at all those words around the edges and build the word sums for them. How do you think those words are built? Can we find any consistent patterns amongst those words to figure out what the base element might be? Or in this case, more than one base element. So when I start to look, oh, clearly I've got my things wrong here. So we look at the word sums. When I look at, I'll just click all the way through this because there we go. So ASTER plus OID is rewritten as ASTEROID, asteroid. That makes sense to me. OID in this case being a, I'm going to get the word wrong, but it means characteristics of. It's like ish, right? So an asteroid has characteristics or something like a star. Aster meaning star, oid, and I know I'm not supposed to do that, just to read the letters. ASTER meaning star, OID meaning characteristics of. Yeah, an asteroid has characteristics of a star. So then I looked at astronaut, and originally I broke it up as ASTRO plus NAUT. Not in this case as like in nautical, right? Sailor. So an astronaut is a star sailor. But then I had to pause and think of, are there any words I know that aren't making use of that O being attached to the ASTR? And that's where I came up with the word astral. So ASTR plus AL, there's no O in that word. So the O has to be a connecting vowel letter in all of these, as opposed to part of the base. Kind of like when we talked before with Mary Beth, bio, it's actually BI plus O. Are there a whole bunch of words that feature bio? There absolutely is, but there's also some words that don't have it with the O attached. Therefore, the base has to be the BI, and the O is a connecting vowel letter. So this second one here on the list is not the correct, word sum. So that would leave me with ASTR plus O plus NAUT is rewritten as ASTRONAUT, astronaut. Then I have astronomer, asterisk, and astronomical. Now, ISK was a tricky one, and I went in search of some more information. It's basically a riff off of ISH. Ish. I could only find one other word that made use of ISK as a suffix, but it does exist. Obelisk. There's two different ways to pronounce the word, depending if I live in Britain or the States. That is one of them. But so there's two. And then we have astronomical. So we can see here from this pattern or from this examination of word sums that we actually have two base elements in play. We have ASTR as illustrated in the document, but we also have ASTER. They both need to be on this thing here. But then this is the other layer of where we need to like take a step back and ask ourselves some questions. It only makes sense for us to explore words and word families if we're going to have a conversation about how that base or base element carrying a sense or meaning of whatever it carries the sense of helps us better understand the word. So writing the definition under the little flap doesn't help us at all if we're not going to have a conversation about what the word means and how it's related to stars. And why I point that out is, so we have both asteroid and asterisk with a suffix that is means like characteristics of, which you can see. You put a little asterisk, it's a teeny tiny star on your page. But what about astronomical? Astronomical means like really big. What does that got to do with stars? So then I would do some digging with students around the etymology of the word astronomical, because historically, back in the day, it meant related to astronomy. And then over time, it lost that astronomy connection, direct connection. And now we just use it in this like big number, a big kind of sense, right? An astronomical number is a really big number. So we'd have to have that conversation because they might not see the connection between star and really big. So when I look at the word astro, and again, super interesting because when I go on Edym Online, the O is attached to the base, even though we know it's a connecting vowel letter. So this is another example of when we need to exercise our understanding and judgment around language, and go, yes, I know that Doug says the O is attached, but I know there's a word where the O isn't attached, so I'm going to write it this way, and that's okay. So from the mid-18th century, meaning star, celestial body, outer space. In ancient Greek, aster typically was star, and astron was the plural, which is kind of cool, meaning the stars. So we have aster here, meaning a single star, astron, meaning the stars, which we can see where we got this astr from when we look at astron.
Charlie, that the Greek background too, or the Greek history would help us with that whole connecting vowel piece too, right?
Absolutely.
If I know it's from Greek, right?
If I know it's from Greek, then O as a connecting vowel letter is a pretty, if you're a wagering enthusiast,
yeah,
you'd bet your money on that, right? And then I think the other next conversation is, what other words are in the family? Because there's more. So what are they? And being able to invite students to offer what other words are in the family. So whether it means you're adding more stars on the page, whether it means you are drawing lines off of the star shape because it's cute and it's got the right font and I really want it on my paper, whatever, like I don't care. But the conversation needs to go beyond the little piece of paper, because we know there's more words that are in that word family that students could then explore and deepen their understanding, because every time they're reading that word sum, they're spelling all the letters out loud. So we're reinforcing the spelling concepts alongside the morphology piece. Oh my gosh, my animations are just totally messed up today. Okay, so then the last thing that came across the desk in the odds and ends collection was around variable suffixes. Now, it wasn't about every variable suffix, but this is where I can't help myself, friends. So when we talk about variable suffixes, we're talking about suffixes that are connected and can change depending on the context or situation. So we've already talked about S and ES and when you use which of those plural designators. So I'm not going to get into that, but I'm going to briefly talk about each one of these. ANT and ENT was the question, like, hey, what do you got? What do you got about those? But I think the more helpful conversation lives in ABLE versus IBLE. So here we go. Let's look at ISE and IZE. So here we have one of those instances of American versus British spelling. Most of the time, no one cares which one you pick. There are folks out there that like, this is the hill they'll die on. Like, we live in Canada, you will spell words with British spelling because we are British colonist descendants. It's a thing. It's not something I get too twisted up about. But that's essentially the difference, that it's between the French, or sorry, the American spelling and the British spelling. So nothing super exciting happening there. When we look at ordinal numbers, and I actually didn't even think about ETH as a variable of TH. I'm not sure, just honestly, I'd never thought about it before. So when we're talking about ordinal numbers, we use TH, except for when the suffix creates an extra spoken syllable. So from 10 to 10th, same amount, but from 20 to 20th, we add the ETH. And of course, as soon as I saw the, like, so 90th would be another example, 90 to 90th. Notice those both end in a Y. So I'd be really curious to do a little dig in with students to know, like, is Y the deal breaker there? That if your number ends in the Y, we're going to use that ETH, the long form, probably because of that extra syllable that's being formed. But that might be a fun thing to dig into. ER and OR as agent suffixes, and I believe we've talked about this a little as well. ER is added to words of an Anglo-Saxon Old English origin, whereas OR is added to words of a Latin origin. Here's a quick test. It doesn't work for every word. So this is not where like you email me like, well, that's whatever. It doesn't work for every word, but it works for many of the words. If you can take the agent suffix off, add ION and produce a new word, use OR. So if you're not sure if it's an Old English word or a Latin word, if you can do that piece, so actor, ooh, I don't know if that's ER or OR. I take the agent suffix off. Can I add ION to ACT to make a new word? Action, I can. It's OR. If I think about the word maker, I take the agent suffix off. I'm left with MAKE. Can I add ION to that to make a new word? Nope, I can't. It's ER. So now, of course, as I'm having this conversation with someone, they were like, so doctor. And I was like, yeah, it doesn't always work. It's just could work. Which brings us to ANT and ENT. Now, I don't know what rock I've been living under, but I wasn't thinking about all of these words featuring suffixes when we get down to the sample words. So ENT is from French and Latin. ANT cycles from Old French to French Latin. So they come from the kind of that same origin. They just took different paths through the language to get to the confusion that exists today. Now, you might find resources that offer, like if it ends in this letter sound, or if it ends in this, then use this. But it only so it gives you a rule, and I'm using air quotes there for anyone that is listening, a rule, but then offers like 6 million times that the rule doesn't work. So anytime I come across one of those, I'm like, nope, then that's not a rule. If there's more exceptions to the rule than the rule itself, then we don't use that. So unfortunately, ANT and ENT doesn't give us this really tidy plan of figuring out which is which. So when we're looking at those as suffixes, they can be used to make adjectives, first of all, and they can also be used to make agent nouns, whether it's a personal agent noun, like the word agent, president, or claimant, which that one's the one that was like, oh, yeah, I guess it is. Or material agent nouns. So remember, an agent noun is someone doing something, doer of, maker of. Ingredient. So like I didn't pull that apart any further, but like if ENT is the suffix, then what else is happening there? That's a word that I would want to dig into a little bit. And we see some mathematical ones there for our math friends out there who are like, can I do word study in math? Oh yeah, you can. What we see with these is you can often tell which spelling is needed by looking at other members of the word family. In other words, when you know the other members of the family, you can make a better guess around which one needs to go with it. Kind of like sign and signature. I can hear the G in signature that I don't hear in sign. So there's got to be a G in sign. Otherwise, where did it come from when I spelt the word signature? So accident to accidental. I know how to spell accidental. Therefore, I know that E needs to be there. So is it foolproof? No, it isn't. It is one of those ending things where I personally would not have students write a spelling test. Let's be clear, friends. I don't have kids write spelling tests anyways, but I wouldn't be having a kid writing a spelling test with ANT words and ENT words. I would have a conversation about how they can often sound the same, how we can look to other members of the family to help us spell the word, but there is no tried and true, like do this, do A, and you will find out what one you need to use. It's just not part of spelling. So that would be a really interesting word study to do with grade 4 students, because grade 4s get that particular suffix in their collection. And I am mindful of time. So if anyone needs to like jump out because, you know, the 45 minutes are up, you can go ahead and jump out. So we have some, this is pulled out of the etymon. Nope, this is from the Oxford English Dictionary. Frequent inconsistency and uncertainty in the present spelling of words with this suffix. So there is no tried and true rule. There is no fast fix here. It's a matter of figuring out where the word came from, looking at the words in the family, and making your best inference from that knowledge. Which is a bummer, because I like to be able to be like, hey, it's a fun trick, but there is no fun trick. Now, the remainder of the slides are going through ABLE and IBLE, and there are some tricks of the trade that you can use to look at these two suffixes. So if the word ends in Y, if your base element or base piece or stem ends in Y, then you can use ABLE. If it comes from Old English, ABLE. And if it's immediately following a hard C or G, ABLE. Now, these are some word family clues that usually work. Do they always work? No, but there are tricks of the trade that you could perhaps have. So can you replace the blank BLE? I put a blank there and it looked weird. So that little diamondy shape is a blank. Blank BLE with a letter string. Oh, my mouse. With a letter string that begins with A, if you can, use ABLE. So if I can take off the whatever, that suffix, and replace it with something that starts with an A, then I can use ABLE. So I can spell the word tolerate, so that means it has to be tolerable, ABLE. Capacity means, so CAP would be the base there, I'm guessing. Or CAPE, CAPE, probably. So if I could take the ABLE off of capable and I could build out something that starts with an A on it, then that tells me it's ABLE. Can you replace the blank BLE with ION? And if still have a word that makes sense. And if you can do that, then you're going to use IBLE. So just like when we took the agent noun off and we added that on to know that it was going to be OR, this is the hint that tells us it could be IBLE. And can you remove the blank BLE and be left with a whole word? And if you can, it's likely ABLE for that spelling. So I don't know how to spell accountable. Can I take the ABLE off and get a word? Yep, it's the word account. Okay, then it's probably ABLE. This one I thought was really interesting and I had never put it together. Can you make a negative with UN or IN? If you can make it with UN, it's usually paired with ABLE. And if you can make it with IN, it's usually paired with IBLE. Now, is that the only thing those prefixes do? No. So if it's not a negative word that it's building, then that doesn't count. So you got to pay attention to the fact that you're making a negative word there. IBLE is not a living suffix in English spelling, which means if a new word pops into English spelling, we will not add IBLE to the end. If it's a new word, we will be adding ABLE.